We're in person for this week's smoke-filled room. We've got an awesome group of guests. I'm especially excited to have my buddy Pat Kenneally here with us because I've got like 3 or 4 topics that every time I add it to the agenda, Lane's like, just hold it for Pat, just hold it for Pat, just hold it for Pat. So we've got stuff I've wanted to talk about for a month, and finally we can get off of our chest because Pat is here. So let me do some introductions. We've got Pat Kenneally. He's the McHenry County State's Attorney, father of like 300 children.
Father of, I'm like a possum.
Yeah, just keep rolling them out. Every time we think, okay, cool, now's the time we can maybe call Pat to run for something more, he's like, nah, I just popped out, my wife just popped out another kid.
Right,
So.
well, don't blame me, blame the Catholic Church, all right?
But we're happy to have our the state's attorney here, McHenry County State's Attorney Pat Kenneally. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for
Before
having
that,
me.
you were a prosecutor, right?
Yeah, worked in the office since 2006, ran in 2016, and will come to the end of my sojourn as state's attorney in December.
Awesome. We've also got with us on the other camera, we've got Patrick Pfingsten. He is the founder, editor, publisher, and chief writer for the Illinoize political blog, Recovering Politica, Recovering Newsman. What else you got?
Just general ray of sunshine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with you and Chris on the same side, I feel like Mark is going to have extra, like...
He's security.
Yeah.
Like we've got him packing because he's security between us.
So he's got to keep us safe between you two and sort of balance the depression out from you guys. Like poor Mark. Speaking of Mark, we got Mark Cavers. He is a longtime political consultant. He's helped elect candidates at every level across the state. Mark, glad to have you with us again.
Thank you very much, and I will do my best to keep these two apart, which I can't imagine will go well. But.
We'll put on screen for you a disclaimer. Nobody hold Mark responsible for anything the two of them say. I don't want to cost the poor guy some clients for joining us today. We've got Chris Jackowiak. He is, of course, political expert for Northern Illinois. Plus, we haven't had you for a couple weeks, Chris, so I'm expecting a lot from you today.
We are so back, ladies and gentlemen. You know, Patrick, I think you and I get along a lot better than people think we do. I think we agree on a lot more than people think we do. So I don't think Mark's going to have too big of a problem today, but I don't know if we're going to talk about the debate at all, which might make the things hairy.
Dude rolled in the room and said, "Make America great again." It's like he's trolling me.
What's the issue? Why don't you want to make America great again,
America's
Patrick?
always been great, buddy.
It looks like we're going to have an excellent episode today. I'm ready for it. I'm excited. We're going to start here. This has been on our agenda for a few weeks, but if you can get the state's attorney who actually did it with you to talk about it, you hold so you can talk about it with them. So we're going to talk about DCFS. It's going to be a giant topic. But first, we've got to start with the local angle. I don't want to get into too much detail, both because it's depressing and because we don't have time. But for those who maybe don't know the AJ Freund story about how DCFS just completely failed that young boy and frankly just failed at every level. Could you give us like the 60-second version of what happened there? I'll have Lane bring up a couple of the photos on screen and post for those who watch this so they have an idea of just how devastating that situation was. But in a nutshell, DCFS had many opportunities to identify that this kid was in a horrible situation, was being abused, and they were completely negligent. We'll talk about what you did to resolve it, but just catch people up on what that was.
Long and the short is sociopathic sadist mom has a kid who's initially taken away from her because he has heroin in his system, has a sense of what normalcy looks like by virtue of the fact that he lived with mom's cousin, who is just a wonderful ray of light. Ultimately, DCFS, through their counseling, it looks like mom and dad are sober, so AJ gets returned to mom and dad. DCFS, mom falls off the wagon in the months leading up to a DCFS visit. She's washed up. She shows up at a hospital with track marks on her arm. When AJ and dad go to pick her up, AJ has some strange bruising all over his head. In about 4 months before DCFS shows up, she shows up at Mount Sinai Hospital in Cook County saying she wants to kill herself because she can't stop using heroin. She's put in the psych ward. The next day, she punches an orderly and is ultimately kicked out of the psych ward. A number of other police contacts, and then ultimately you end up on December 18th of 2018, where mom shows up at a Taco Bell in Crystal Lake, calls the police because she says that her boyfriend, who's living with her husband and her 2 children, one of whom is AJ, has stolen her Suboxone, which is, for those who don't know, for the uninitiated, Suboxone is a drug that's used to treat heroin addiction. It's an opiate itself. Police officer sees just this horrible bruise on AJ. And when I say horrible bruise, I mean big and nasty, wrapping around black and yellow and red. And so she turns to AJ and she says, "What happened to your side?" And AJ says, and before AJ can answer, mom whispers in AJ's ear, "Oh, AJ, the dog did that to you, right?" at which point AJ, which is so common for children of child abuse, agrees to that fabrication. And so there was a bunch of stuff that should have been done, which ultimately was never done. At bottom, what happened is Mr. Acosta viewed this investigation as something, as not sort of protecting a child who was clearly in danger, but just something that had to be moved out of his way so that he could get it off of his schedule. The investigation was entirely phoned in. The investigation was incomplete. All of the things that he should have done under DCFS regulations were ultimately not done. And as a result of that, we charge, and then 4 months later, AJ's beaten to death by his mother with a shower head. And so thereafter, we went back and looked at sort of the whole timeline. We saw just the grievous, mind-numbing lack of effort as well as accountability with respect to the DCFS visit in December, and chose to charge him with endangering the life and health of a child.
For that visit, I mean, some of the photos have been shared online of just what was seen. Anybody walking through, seeing those things in that house, we know that that kid was not safe.
No, and not just that, but what Cunningham would do, which was AJ's mother, is in the months leading up to his death, she would film her abuse. And in 2 of the instances, she created these videos, and those videos will haunt me for the rest of my life. And I don't, and I don't mean that lightly. I mean, I've seen all nature of harm, and for the most part, there's a certain degree of callousness that I think police officers and state's attorneys, this is beyond the pale. And so a lot of people try to explain away a lot of criminal behavior. They had a head shrinker that went up at Joint Cunningham sentencing, which I cross-examined, and they tried to explain what was going on in this clinical language of personality disorder. But what my whole point is that the clinical the language that we try to use from a medical standpoint to try to describe what was going on is woefully insufficient. What we're talking about is evil, pure and simple and unadulterated. And that's what it was, and that's what you sort of peered into. And when you look into that darkness, it's something that stays with you.
I watched a lot of the Acosta trial as it happened, and let me first say you did a spectacular job in prosecuting that case. As a father of a toddler boy, I was in tears more than once. I wrote a column during that trial of how angry I was at the failed system. That no child deserves this. And I know there has been criticism over political stuff, where the Mr. Acosta used to serve, what party he was part of, who runs DCFS. It's bullshit. This was wrong. And I am sick at the failures that partially caused this child to lose his life. So
let's talk about you talked about the case, and you mentioned it too. When you brought this case against DCFS, but specifically the Acosta, the individual who was responsible, plus the supervisor and some others, right? But when you brought this, there were a lot of people who said, you can't sue, this isn't going to work, this is a waste of time. And I think, I don't want to speak for you, but what I got from this was, first of all, people who do wrong should be held responsible, but someone had to do something about a system that was failing. And I think a lot of people said, you can't take on the system, you can't shed a light on the failures of the system. Everyone thought the trial was just for show, and then you actually got a guilty verdict, which no one thought was possible.
Yeah, the point of this exercise was not to sort of make was not for me as, let's say, David going up against Goliath, trying to effect some sort of change or have this echo down the corridors of power down in Springfield. One of the deficits that I think of DCFS, and why I think ultimately we can get to it, why it should be under local control, is because DCFS doesn't have to listen to a person like me. So if I have a problem with DCFS, and I've had many problems with DCFS with regard to their services that they apply in McHenry County, when I call down to Springfield, it's like speaking into a black hole. And it's like, Kenneally who and what, let's make a phone call and some emails and get the regional manager, and so that kind of thing. But it is true that a DCFS agent can respond to a call with a child, and they can they can apply every appropriate regulation, they can use good judgment, and it is still true that a child can die. So we've tried to, we're fallible human beings, and we cannot design a perfect system that ultimately is fully predictive of danger as well as the future. It is also true that a person can respond to an investigation, do a less than spectacular job, make mistakes, exercise poor judgment, and a kid dies. And that generally would be that in my mind would be something that would need to be, that DCFS would need to respond to on an employment level. It is not the case that a person can show up and in bad faith because of laziness, lack of accountability, lack of empathy, and pure apathy can go respond to an investigation, make a complete mess of it, walk around hearing, seeing no evil whatsoever, and then a kid die and there not be responsibility. So simply by virtue of the fact that they're saying like, oh, well, we're dealing with a high-risk population, well, that puts you on notice that what you're doing is not just necessarily a job, it is a vocation, and you are well aware of the risk of not doing your job by virtue of the fact that these children are already endangered.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm always calling out hypocrisy, sometimes on our side of the aisle, many times on the other. But I think for the left who want to hold every police officer criminally accountable for everything that they do, to cry foul when you want to do the same thing for someone at DCFS who has clearly not done their jobs to a point where it led to a child losing his life, a 3-year-old boy, right? 3 years old? 5 years old. There's got to be accountability for that, and kudos to you guys in your office. You worked your butts off to make this happen, and I know it wasn't your intent, but it did shine a light on the failures of a system that we need to be talking about more.
Yep.
And I know Mark wants to jump in real quick.
I was just gonna say, like, the flip side of that too is just like, what should government do at its base level? It's protect kids like this. And so for all of us to say, like, not even just hypocrisy, but like, let's put forward a governing vision of what government should do. Like, we can all agree on this, that, like you said, this is what they should do. That should be like table stakes. And the fact that they can't, that's not happening now is something we should talk about forever.
Yeah.
And can we mention that there was legislation moving in Springfield in May? I know it passed the House. Did it pass the Senate?
Sitting on the governor's desk right now.
And so it did pass the Senate. That essentially, you can explain this better than I can, that reports of a new parent who has drugs in their system does not get sent to the state's attorney any longer. Carol Ammons, who is one of the most progressive Democrats in the House, I have a history with her, said on the House floor, a new parent having drugs in their system is not an indication that they are unfit to be a parent. That is a clear indication that they are unfit to be a parent. And it's like we're living on different planets when we're talking about this stuff.
Well, so that whole thing is like the medicalization of substance abuse. And so there's all of these pieties out there with respect to, well, what should we do with people who are suffering from substance abuse, and how do we not stigmatize them, et cetera? And then they also use this word trauma, which is one of these completely overused words whose meaning has just been entirely cheapened by virtue of the fact that it's been exploited in order to push unpopular things by making it seem worse than it otherwise is. But what that bill does, well, first of all, you have to go back. So that is, which is one of the things that, as I've learned more about how business gets done in Springfield, has been more and more deeply concerning. And a lot of them talk about how the criminal justice system is broken, and I'm like, no, the criminal justice system is not broken. Criminal justice system is never broken. Your system is broken, and maybe you should turn a critical eye towards what's going on in Springfield as opposed to pointing to us in these counties or otherwise. Okay, anyway, that bill was being pushed, and I don't want to get myself into trouble here. So that bill was being pushed by a special interest, okay? And this is one of the special interests that essentially just gets what it wants down in Springfield. And so I came out against it. And the reason that I came out against it was because, first of all, I'm the president of the Illinois State's Attorneys Association. Secondly, you had AJ, which is near and dear to my heart. And the only reason why AJ made it to 5 years old is because we were notified of the fact that he had a positive heroin test upon birth. We brought an abuse and neglect case, and that was managed, and he was removed from that home. That's the only reason why he had 3 years of life. Okay, and the reason that he didn't have it is because because he was put back into a environment where his mother was a drug addict on orders of magnitude worse than anything that you've ever seen. And so you nailed it which is if you're using the whole substance abuse issue is that your interests are narrowed to the point where the only thing that becomes important to you is drugs. And so we all think about, like, how is it that these people risk their jobs? And how is it that these people risk their families? How is it that they risk their relationships with their children? How is it that they risk the welfare of children simply by virtue of the fact that they're drugs? That's why your singular interest is drugs. And so if you're going to add, as you now know, and I don't know if you two know, but if you're going to drop an infant into that situation where somebody is fully focused on and entirely consumed with acquiring and taking drugs, that is necessarily and inherently a danger to a child, because what is that person going to do when it's either the baby, which you're essentially a slave to for the first 6 months of its life, when the baby's needs are in conflict with your desire to use drugs? And obviously that puts a baby in a dangerous situation of either neglect or abuse, which is shut up, kid, you're getting in the way of what I'm trying to do. I don't mean to go, I'm sorry for rambling here, but let me just say, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's certainly, I'm all for helping these parents get clean and
Yeah.
bring their families back together. But you're right. If they can't be together, they shouldn't be together. And this was a beautiful child who was murdered.
Right.
And that is a failure on the state.
Right.
And that hurts me. That should
Right.
hurt all of us.
Well, and you look at the statements that came out, because obviously you ran a quote, which then you seem to be in the crosshairs of Pritzker and the left lately between the marijuana moms and this stuff. But good on you for speaking out for what you believe. And when it comes to DCFS, every quote that I've got a few of them here, but for time I'm not going to read them. But every quote was, you know, this is inhumane for the mother, and we need to take care of the mother. And I think we've reached a point in society now where if you're on the left, you're so far to the left that you don't even care about the baby even after it's born.
so weird.
Let alone before it's born. We're at this point now where the baby's not even, doesn't matter. The mom has made a choice to take these drugs, or according to some of those medicals, the birthing parent has made a choice to take these drugs and put that child in harm. And their solution is, let's just let DCFS take care of it, because DCF has such a wonderful track record that clearly they're going to do a great job taking care of it.
But all of it is so symbolic, because what they say is we don't want to stigmatize mom by bringing sort of pseudo-criminal process against her. The process that initiates is an abuse and neglect case, which is entirely confidential, which is not a criminal case. I cannot bring criminal charges against a mother who uses drugs while the baby is in utero. So this is a confidential process. The whole point of abuse and neglect court is to bring all of the interested parties together in a courtroom to protect. So you have all of the social services, you have probation, you have the public defender, you have the judge, you have the state's attorney's office, all come together in order to wrap. So this is exactly what they say they want, which is to wrap rehabilitative services around mom while protecting the baby. And yet now it's like, well, even that's too much of a stringent response against mom, and that's going to keep mom from accessing prenatal care, which is a total lie, and they do not have any of the evidence to prove that.
Isn't this what happens when you let politicians at any level, but let's say Springfield now, make decisions that they have no knowledge about? I mean, we've had a chance, we've gotten to work with some judges who are in family law and family court, and we've learned just how different that is from, let's say, criminal court. And I think you've got politicians down in Springfield who have no idea that they just see court system. They see, we don't like the fact that people are getting locked up. Courts are the courts. It's punitive. Everybody's in trouble. Let's just not put anybody in court.
So this was not a politician's production, if you ask me. This came from the medical people, all right? And they're deeply confused on substance abuse. And anybody who wants to talk to you about how substance abuse is a disease is deeply confused on the issue and has no real understanding of what it actually is, and certainly has never lived through it. What I would say is that the problem with this whole bill is that you had this incredibly powerful lobby, and it's interesting when you probably see this more than I do, but I had not seen it. But all of these lobbyists down in, or many, I shouldn't say all because that's too categorical, but many of the lobbyists down in Springfield, when you talk to them, they're so transactional, you know what I mean? And they're so matter of fact. And I'm not even sure they know. Their whole point is not to create the best policy. Their whole point is I have a job, and my job is to get this across the finish line with the least amount of tumult as I possibly can. And they have all of these devices and all of these arcane regulations that they can use in order to do it, which suppress just basic aspects of a democracy, such as dissent, such as proof, such as debate, and all the rest. And I saw this with the Safety Act as well. I mean, how they passed that whole thing was disgraceful, and it certainly was totally out of step with what my expectations were for the system. So when you get on the calls with it, it's basically there's no moving them off of their position. They sort of will matter-of-factly they'll sort of matter-of-factly tell you, this we believe that this bill, and they have their talking points, and then you push back and they go, well, we will take those points back to Carol Ammons, but I ultimately don't. I think we do have the support to move this bill. And so if you have any objections or if you have any tweaks to the bill that you'd like to make, like, let us know it's like, no, man, like, it's not the tweaks that I'm talking about. It's the underlying basis of this entire, the fundamentals of this bill is crap, and you need to rethink it. And if we actually had an open debate about this, most people would agree, I think, with what we're all saying here, which is that bill is totally unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, listen, my wife is big on criminal justice reform. You know this, you've had some conversations with her. It's a passion of hers, and yet even she looked at that bill and she's like, what the hell? I mean, she has seen babies who are born who have to go through that withdrawal, and she described it to me, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's unreal that you could put a baby through that. And as you mentioned, the three of us who are, especially, you mentioned not getting the baby taking up every moment of your time. I'm in month 3, so we're still at that point. The fact that you could put a baby through that just, it is, and I don't know if you don't have, do you have kids too?
I have a 2-year-old now.
Okay, so yeah, so Mark as well. We got to get Chris on that. We got to catch him up to that. But yeah, how you could put a baby through that, and again, when you're making policy, how you could just not care about the needs of that little baby, because at the end of the day, when you say DCFS is going to handle it, even when DCFS moves quickly, it's months, not minutes, not days.
But that's another. Go ahead.
Well, so like that's I guess where my question is where does the reflexive defense of a system that I think we all agree failed, like where does that come from? Is that what you're saying the medical community is? Is that where there's just like this reflexive criminal justice reform?
Well, we in this room agree
ahead.
that it failed.
So
the majority in Springfield doesn't agree that it failed.
I can tell you a story. So after Acosta's conviction, okay, there's like this press conference that they have like the multiple microphones, and I've done it like 4 times in my life, and like I'm sort of going out there, and it's kind of nerve-wracking because I feel like I'm back in the 1920s, like talking to the brass, and it's always sunny out, and I wilt in the sun and start like sweating with my big Irish face. I know, and this thing is just like this thing just radiates heat and absorbs UV rays. But like I go out. And I answer the questions, and usually it's pretty quick. But that was the first time that I'd ever been heckled. So there were these DCFS people out there, okay? And so they're saying like, DCFS members suffer trauma from doing the job, and have you taken that into account when you prosecuted him? And I was thinking to myself like, you got to be the most obtuse person in the world when you're sitting there talking about DCFS workers' trauma when somebody was just convicted and sentenced to prison for the blunt force trauma of a 5-year-old. Here's the thing. It's a job. It's a job. Do the job. If the job is too mentally taxing for you, don't do the job or go find another job. And then I was listening to the new head of DCFS, and I wish her the very best of luck, and I certainly hope she has the opportunity to turn everything around. But she was also she said, when you're separating a child from its mother, there's just so much trauma, and they use that word again, just overusing this buzzword, trauma. And I'm thinking to myself, like, your argument is that taking a child out of a house where they're being abused and neglected is trauma? It's the opposite of trauma. You're keeping the child from trauma. And respectfully, the trauma that an abusive, perhaps drug-addicted, or neglectful parent has is a secondary concern for me. I used to have this friend, and I know you want to jump in. I used to have this friend, and he would sort of get picked on and so we would go back to his house, and his mom would be just like in despair over the fact, like the fact that he was suffering, getting picked on at school, she internalized completely, you know? And I would just think to myself, like, you're in no position to help this kid not be getting bullied. Like, what DCFS kids need and what a lot of kids need is somebody to reach down and pull the kid out of the hole, not get down into the hole with them and be like, we're sad too, you know? And I think that's part of it.
Well, I was just going to say in defense of DCFS employees, we had a daycare issue that led to a meeting with a DCFS officer, and in general, they are wonderful people who do wonderful work and are oftentimes put in terrible situations. And they don't want to rip families apart. We have seen 2 DCFS employees in the last 5 years murdered on the job. I mean, that's not okay. And they need to be put in safer situations. They need more staff and better resources, and I'm all for that. But there is a reason that they need to be held accountable, like Acosta. There is a reason that DCFS in its current form is not working. There's a reason, and it is a systemic problem. And just throwing more money at the problem, like I think it's an additional $75 million this year, so they're going to get $1.5 billion in taxpayer dollars this year to operate DCFS. That's a lot of money. Is it going to change anything? I hope so, but I'm not hopeful because the governor and Democrats in charge in Springfield are turning a blind eye to the issues that really matter in this regard.
Well, and this is where I can't have a topic, and for those of you who watch this show regularly, I can't have a topic where I don't talk about Pritzker and attack the Democrats, so here we go. But what I don't understand is the hypocrisy here. We heard nonstop when Governor Pritzker, I want to make sure I get my details right here, when Governor Pritzker was running back in 2018, it was Bruce Rauner's fatal mismanagement at Quincy, where 13 veterans died, and that was awful, and that was sad. 13. Under Governor Pritzker's watch, while Governor Pritzker has been the governor of this state, I'm looking at the stats where just the last 2 years, we have over 300 children have died under DCF's care. Now, obviously, some of those numbers are, I think there's like 26 one year that they were actively watching. So I don't want to inflate this. I'm not saying hundreds of kids are all Pritzker's fault, but I think my larger point that I'm trying to make here is that if we had to run a governor out of the state because of the unfortunate 13 deaths of veterans, which is awful.
There were 36 in LaSalle, by the way.
Yeah, there's that too. But my point is this. Where's the media on this? Where is the focus from Pritzker? Where's the focus from politicians? We are talking about hundreds of children. Just in the last 2 years, you see the stats. It was pretty steady until 2 years ago where it spiked, whether it's because of COVID or what, I don't know. But the 2022 numbers, the 2023 numbers are in the upper 100, over 176 one year, like 150 in 2023, of kids that have died that are being actively monitored by DCFS. Where are the headlines on this? Where are the spotlights on this? And why is it not nothing else matters? Why is it not, I don't care about the DNC in Chicago, I don't care about migrants or any other issue shouldn't matter. Nothing else should matter. Kids are dying and you're the governor of this damn state. Nothing else should matter. Every press conference should be led by, here's what we're doing at DCFS. Here's our plan for DCFS. And yet it's maybe once a year, we threw some money at it. I hired a new director or whatever her title is. And then everyone's like, okay, cool. We'll come back in a year and see if more kids have died. I do not understand this.
DCFS has been trying to solve the problem of some of the ineptitude, and I agree with you, Patrick, that there are wonderful DCFS agents out there. Like, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the most empathetic, caring, motivated, kind people at DCFS, and so I don't mean to in any way give the idea that there's sort of this overarching problem with the individuals that make up DCFS. But I do think that as an institution, it has a complete lack of accountability. And the last 10, 15, 20 years have been littered with one leader after the next, failing and ultimately withering on the vine. And one hypothesis that I could point to is that well, first of all, there's a couple things. Number one is there's so much fatalism around DCFS that there's almost just the expectation that it's going to fail And there's also the expectation that nobody ultimately can fix it. And I think that gives immunity to a lot of people. In addition to that, back in April of 2024, Mr. Acosta, as well as Mr. Polavin, who were the two people that we charged, Mr. Acosta was the only one that was ultimately convicted, they were still appealing their terminations from DCFS. It took so if you want to institute change, fundamentally the first and most effective way to institute change in any institution is to change the personnel and get rid of personnel that is not working. That is an incredibly Herculean task with respect to how that employment agreement is all set up. I'll say too that for me, and I'd be interested to hear your view on this, to me the solution is local control. If the sheriff in McHenry County, and he's not, he's a great guy, he's a good guy, but if the sheriff in McHenry County were beating confessions out of defendants, okay, so not doing his job, or if there was a pervasive shortcoming with respect to the service provided by the sheriff, he has to listen to me. When I say, like, we got a problem and you have to say, he has to listen to me. But going back to DCFS, they don't have to listen to me. If you created a branch, if you took that, however many $1 million it is, 2.8% of the Illinois budget, and you divided it among the court circuits.
That's
and
billion, 1.4 billion.
Okay,
yeah.
excuse me. If you divided that up among the court circuits and you say, make DCFS a division of the sheriff's department and hire law enforcement, people who are particularly concerned about crimes against children, to do everything that DCFS does, I can guarantee you in McHenry County, something like AJ, number one, would never have happened, and I think you could prevent a lot of it. And then when something does happen, you know who's accountable. Right now, who's accountable? Who do you blame?
Well, I think that politically, I get it. Pritzker has national aspirations. He's not going to grab something like this, which is just, it's in political speak, like, this is a career killer. You take responsibility for this, it kills your political career. So I get it. I get the political realities. Every once in a while, and my buddy Pfingsten will say, every once in a while, politics shouldn't matter, and he gets on me sometimes privately, because I tend to be a little more political. But this is one of those times that even I'll admit, politics should not matter. I don't care if this ends your political career. If you're a leader, kids are dying, take responsibility. I don't care if it means you never get to be president. Go step up and do something about it.
And it's not Pritzker's fault that the bureaucracy has failed, because it has been failing for decades.
But it's 6 years in.
I'm not saying that he hasn't. He's had the opportunity to improve it and hasn't. And that's an issue in itself. He has not taken leadership. He left Mark Smith in the job as director, who was doing a terrible job. To your point, Pat, on local control, I get the idea. I don't know that it works in application, especially in smaller counties. I'm from Iroquois County, which is population 25,000. Do you have enough staff? Do you have qualified staff to be there and make it another arm of county government? Ford County right next to it is under 10,000. You've got counties in Southern Illinois that are 3,000 and 4,000 people. It's hard to make that work on a county by county basis. I do think that breaking up the bureaucracy makes sense, and I think, and you're going to hate that I have any praise for what the administration is doing. They're moving some of the like daycare stuff and some of the administrative stuff out of DCFS and into this new early childhood department, which hopefully frees up some people and time and bandwidth to focus on the important stuff. But I'm ready for a radical solution. I'm ready for the governor to get up someday on the 5th floor of the big new building in downtown and say, I'm done screwing around. Yeah. Here's what we're going to do. I've called the best minds in the country. We're going to fix this. I'm waiting.
Yeah,
I'm waiting.
And honestly, I'll set partisanship aside. I'll be the first person. I'll stand in the damn press conference with him and say, I'm a Republican, I support this. I don't care. I think this is not a partisanship issue. This is get up and do it. And I think in his first term, fine, you're still figuring out where the light switches are. You are 6 years in. He had plenty of time to come up with this brand new grand plan for early childhood education, for healthcare. They just did some big healthcare stuff this year. As you said, where is the plan for DCFS? That should be the first thing you tackle. We're 6 years in, we haven't even started to tackle it. Where's the plan? And where's the effort, where's the care? And where's the newspaper, the media going out there and putting a spotlight on this, saying, hey, we should care about this. Kids are dying. Over 300 kids in 2 years have died that should matter.
And why can't communities, and so maybe it may not work in certain situations, but why can't communities who want to take ultimate responsibility for the welfare of children be able to do so?
Yeah. All right, we have spent half an episode on this, which it's juicy, it's awesome. But any closing thoughts on DCFS? Then I'll do Chris's favorite thing and play our song of the week. But any final thoughts on this, or somebody stepping up, taking responsibility for it?
Just do better. Do better. That's all I'm asking.
While Collin figures out how to play a song on his laptop, I'll echo Pat's complaints about the philosophy of all of this, because one of the issues with the modern left is that they want to eliminate the stigma around abnormal, parental relationships and want to normalize them. So when you have a mother who's addicted to heroin, a father addicted to crack, that's not an abnormal situation anymore to the left. That's just, another way of life for a parent to raise their child. And that's where a lot of this is going. So I think there's got to be, the philosophy of the left has to change in this issue to where we can actually say, no, you shouldn't be addicted to heroin and trying to raise your child. You shouldn't be addicted to crack and trying to raise your child. That is not just a different type of parenting, and that's not just a disease according to the medical system. That's a problem, and DCFS should step up, and there needs to be a change in philosophy from those on the left on this issue.
We always do the song of the week, and so I put in the system to spit out a song on, doesn't matter, left or right, I don't care, someone needs to step up and fix DCFS. It spit out a song called Save Our Kids, which I think is already a pretty good start.
Children crying in the night, hope slipping out of sight, hearts that break and voices small, politicians hear our call. In Illinois, shadows grow, kids are risk with nowhere to go, no left or right, just wrong and right, protect the children with all our might, nothing else matters, save our kids tonight. Together we stand, let's make it right. No more delays or alibis. Fix DCFS before another kid dies. Bureaucracy's a heavy chain. Each delay brings more pain. The lives lost in paper trails. Hear our plea before it fails. Can you see them through the dark? Lives that need a little spark. Every child deserves a chance. Give them love, give them a dance. Nothing else matters, save our kids tonight. Together we stand, let's make it right. No more delays or alibis. Fix DCFS before another kid dies.
All right, we'll bring that up in post, but this, I gotta say, you mentioned it earlier. I cared about this topic before my boy Teddy was born. I cared about it. There was even one night, Abby was asleep and I was just in my feels for a little bit, and I was like, that's it. I'm quitting, I'm done with politics. I'm just gonna find some way to do something about DCFS. I gotta be honest, now that Teddy's here, like, I don't care about politics. I will, if you come up with something that we can do, that I can do, that would help fix DCFS, I will leave politics tomorrow and go do it. Like, this is gut-wrenching. It's a tearjerker issue for me, and I don't know. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But I think the song generator we did spit out a pretty powerful song there, and I'll just leave it at that. All right, let's go into other topics. Enough on that. We'll get into more political topics here. We have on the agenda, we got to talk about corruption, because it seems in the last week, defense attorneys for corrupt politicians had a pretty good week. And as always on corruption topics, we always like to start with our buddy Chris, since he's the king of corruption for these podcasts. But in the last week, we have Ed Burke, who supposedly was going to get a really, really tough penalty to deter politicians from doing this kind of crap in the future, and then got essentially a slap on the wrist in terms of both the time of the sentence, which he'll serve a year or less, if that, plus a fine, a hefty fine of $2 million, except the truth of the matter is that because he can use his campaign account for political purposes, he can pay the entire fine from his campaign account and won't pay a penny of that personally. So basically there is no penalty to Ed Burke for corruption or alleged corruption. Well, not alleged anymore. And then in just a couple days ago, SCOTUS passed down a ruling that's going to have big impacts on the Madigan trial. Looks like the ComEd 4 want to go back to trial because they say that now their sentences were too tough in light of SCOTUS's ruling. Chris, I want to pass it to you just for your initial thoughts on this, but it seems like the feds were having a good couple of years here with getting corruption, I guess, I don't know, off the streets, if you will, but bringing down some pretty good sentences and getting some good headlines. Seems in the last week, a lot of that has maybe been reversed.
So I'll start with Ed Burke. And the interesting thing about Burke is you can tell how beloved Ed Burke was by some people by the amount of letters in support of him came in. And the judge mentioned that as one of the things she took into consideration when she was handing down sentencing. There were so many people who wrote in to the judge and to the court saying, Ed Burke drove me to the hospital when no one else would drive me to the hospital. Ed Burke helped my family go to the Holy Land. Ed Burke helped my family pay for our electric bill and we couldn't pay it that month. So many really heart-wrenching stories about people who lived in Ed Burke's ward and were under Ed Burke's political fiefdom who have positive things to say about the man. And yeah, I would agree that old Eddie slipped up in his last years, but it was a little bit heartwarming to see that there were so many people who were touched by Ed Burke, and I think that went into the sentencing. So the feds are going to be kicking themselves for a long time about how they only got 2 years for Ed Burke, and if he won't even serve any of that. In addition, to the second point you brought up, bribery is now legal now, guys. It's good news for us. Good news for us,
I don't know if that's good news.
Good news for us. Bribery is now legal in this country because apparently you can collect a bribe after you've already done a bribable act and not actually go to prison for it because that just can fall under as a gift. That's my understanding of the SCOTUS ruling, which is bad news for the ComEd 4, the feds in the ComEd 4 trial, and bad news for them in the Madigan trial. I think it's a very interesting precedent that the court's setting in this case. But if you're Mike Madigan's defense team and you're any of the defense team on any of the ComEd 4 cases, you are jumping for joy now because you might get a new trial if you're the ComEd 4, and you might actually get your case thrown out if you're Mike Madigan. So the feds have egg on their face this week. Couldn't get a lengthy conviction for Ed Burke. The judge ended up making Ed Burke look good somehow, and now bribery is legal in this country. So good job, guys.
Yeah, but I can't even believe, you look at that sentence for Burke. I mean, the judge went less than half of what even the defense attorneys were asking for. Like I've never seen this before. And if you read the transcript of how she started versus when she actually put down the sentence, when it started, I was like, okay, good, this is gonna be a decent sentence, and then it's a slap on the wrist at most.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a column this week that Ed Burke got off easy. I mean, significantly easy, and the fact that the $2 million fine can be paid by the money that was in his campaign fund in 1998 because he was grandfathered in under the new law. That new law 30 years ago is despicable. I'm sure there are people that believe Ed Burke is a great guy. I've never met him. I've only been in the same room as him once. But to say that he slipped up in the last few years when there's a pattern of decades of corruption, he's not a good guy. This is a guy that betrayed the public trust, and I don't care if he's 80 or 50. He should be paying for it. And it's a sham that at someday, and maybe we thought it was going to be, King Hairdo from, the realm of 2002 and 2006, whose name I don't like to say out loud. The hope was that he was going to be the precedent. But Democrats sure moved past who's that guy? I've never heard of him, pretty quickly, much like Republicans will once Donald Trump goes to prison. But the Supreme Court case, and Pat, you're the attorney in the room, so I'm going to defer to you. But I am certainly befuddled by Justice Kavanaugh's opinion. I understand that there are things that are done for politicians, taking them out to dinner, giving them tickets to a Cubs game. Nobody wants to go to a White Sox game anyway.
Not even me.
So I understand that there are gratuities, and there are usually laws that balance those sort of things. But essentially, as I read it, and again, I'm a big dummy, but there was no touching pay to play. which is essentially what Madigan is accused of, was getting things for people around him, even though he didn't profit personally. And that scares the hell out of me, that the Madigan case is crumbling. And I'm really worried that this is going to let him off on a technicality, because there's nobody out there that thinks it's okay for the Speaker of the House to get things for the people around him, to get what he wants in return for legislation. It's wrong. We know it's wrong. It should be illegal. And I think that this case just completely missed the point.
Well, you look at just the ruling from that judge with Ed Burke specifically, the summary, the reading of it is, it's okay if you're corrupt to get into power, as long as you use a tiny bit of that power you accumulated to help a couple people around you, like sending them to the Holy Land. That's cool. You helped a couple little people, so we're cool with the rest of your corruption.
That was a little hyperbolic on mine. I don't know if that was a specific case, but I was just trying to go through all the things.
But going to the funeral was mentioned by the judge specifically. He was showed up. I have never seen a politician show up at some of these funerals before. All right, so what you're saying then is you can do all of these things wrong, but as long as you do a couple things right, you're cool. We're not going to hold you responsible for breaking the public trust. As you kind of intimated before, when you were in a public position, you have taken on a higher level calling, a higher level of responsibility. And what we're looking at now with this judge, and possibly even a little bit with the SCOTUS ruling, is we're loosening up those rules on what you can and cannot do as that public official at a time when we should be doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the Burke stuff just strikes me as like he was a good elected official. Like, that's basic constituent service for a war boss. Like, that's what it is. The other thing too,
he's in the room looking for precinct workers.
Right.
Come on.
I think the other thing too is I think in Republican circles you always hear like, well, the feds are going to save us, and over that's been proved wrong. And I think that shows here with Burke and potentially with Madigan again too. Like, you can't count on the FBI or the feds, or somehow that's going to get Republicans back into power. It's up to winning elections at the end of the day.
I mean, we need state's attorneys at the county level. We need an attorney general in the state of Illinois who will actually go after corrupt public officials.
I mean, I guess my point is that, and I'm not here to defend Ed Burke, okay? I'm not. But the prosecution of Ed Burke and Madigan seemed to me to have political overtones to it. And it also seems to me to have been sanctioned at certain high levels of the Democratic Party. So the idea with there's the most dangerous thing that you can do as a law enforcement agency and as a prosecutor is to begin investigating an individual generally in order to find something that you can use ultimately to prosecute him. That's what the FBI was up to with Mike Madigan for probably a decade. And again, and this is just me inferring, that the reason that was is because politically he had such a clutch on Illinois power that they could not otherwise get rid of him, despite the fact that they knew that it was in their best interests to do so. So if you look at just sort of the selective prosecution, how many people who you think were peers of Mike Madigan, Ed Burke, and otherwise were engaged in the exact same type of activity? This was the water that Ed Burke swam in since he initially probably started in politics in the 1960s and the 1970s. This is just how things ultimately got done. And so the rules changed on an Ed Burke and a Mike Madigan very quickly in the last 10 or so years, and now they're facing these prison sentences, and they're the only one facing these prison sentences, despite the fact that these are the rules that they came up with. That's the gravity in which this whole culture that was pulled towards. And to me, while I'm not saying that it's a good sentence of 2 years, the point of the exercise was to get rid of Madigan and Burke, and it worked. Everything else in the eyes of the Democrats is irrelevant.
But Tim Mapes got 30 months, which is more than Ed Burke got. Tim Mapes got 30 months for lying to a grand jury. Not for the acts, not for anything he did or Madigan did. He got 30 months for lying. The standard is off here. Well, and also I should mention it was a Republican appointed U.S. attorney who indicted Madigan. So it's not like it was coming from a Democratic White House.
Well, it was. Well, you're right. It was a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who indicted Madigan, but it was Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth who allowed that U.S. attorney to stay in office after the Biden
Right.
administration
And they begged Biden. It was the Democrats that begged Biden to allow him to stay.
Right, because there was an interest both within the state of Illinois' Democratic politics and national Democratic politics to remove Madigan from power. And you're the first person, I think, who's ever said this part out loud, Pat, so I'm very thankful somebody said this, because I was going to if you didn't, because there was a direct interest amongst the national and state Democratic Party that they had to take out Mike Madigan because he was consolidating too much power within himself. And the same applied to Ed Burke, because Ed Burke consolidated too much power amongst himself in the city of Chicago, and there's so many other special interests within the Democratic Party who want greater influence and don't want the old Irish bosses around anymore. So what do? You take out Mike Madigan at the state level, you take out Ed Burke in the city of Chicago, and you allow for more special interests to go in there. Now, in 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, those same special interests may be on the outs too, and they might be indicted. All of these indictments are politically motivated one way or another. Are Mike Madigan and Ed Burke guilty? Well, Ed Burke's already been convicted as being guilty. Probably. But you know how many other politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, can be convicted for these same things? A lot of them. And a lot of them aren't doing any jail time or aren't even being convicted or aren't even being indicted. In order to get indicted by the feds, you have to be a target for one reason or another. And both Ed Burke and Mike Madigan fit those modes.
So I guess the political question here, I know Patrick Pfingsten and I have kind of talked about this both online and offline about corruption as an issue for Republicans going into the fall. There's a group who have really hoped that Madigan and the corruption would be a big issue that would, wash Republicans into office throughout the state of Illinois. I think we've been trying to debunk that for a while now, but there was hope that the Madigan trial would make corruption an issue going into November. Does this increase or decrease the likelihood of that happening?
Decrease. If Madigan might not even go to trial at this point, depending on how things go. That might be, a pie in the sky type dream for Madigan's defense team, but he might not even go to trial. He might not even be convicted, and it's certainly moving in the wrong direction in terms of how the press is going to be able to frame this in the media regarding the Madigan trial. The Madigan was never going to work in this election cycle. It worked once, it'll never work again. And it's not going to work because the winds are already moving against that because of the Supreme Court.
Well, you've seen it a lot on the House Republican side where they've been trying to tee this up and make it a big issue. I will give credit where it's due that lately they seem to finally have moved more towards cost of living and the issues that are actually resonating with voters right now. But there still has been sort of that undercurrent, that push to try to make corruption an issue that's going to work with us. And obviously we're seeing it wasn't working at the polls up until now. I don't see how this makes it even better for us. I think the more we can focus on the issues that actually matter to voters, like cost of living, the more we're going to have success in November.
Yeah, I remember in the Supreme Court race, there were a lot of people who were very bullish with respect to the 3rd District race and Michael Burke by virtue of the fact that Mike Madigan had just been indicted, and they couldn't believe their luck in terms of the timing of the indictment, and they thought that was going to carry them to glory. I think Pritzker's money on this issue washes a lot of the linens clean.
All right, let's go to our next topic. This is national, but it has a state focus, so I let it on the agenda. But we've got the third-party candidates who have filed in the state of Illinois. They're on a different timeline than the major party candidates plus independents, so they've all filed in the state of Illinois. The headliner is, of course, that Robert Kennedy has filed for president in the state of Illinois. I know you're pouring through the signatures. I think a lot of people are, what I've heard is that it looks like he'll make it on the ballot. So my question really is less about them getting on the ballot, more about does this have any sort of impact in Illinois? Nationally, Kennedy is polling at about 9% in national polls, so it's not like he's one of those third-party candidates who will get 1 or 2%. He's getting a decent percentage at the polls. The question is, who does that help? Who does that hurt? Does this have any impact on Illinois elections in 2024, or is it just something fun for us politicos to talk about when we're having a cigar?
Illinois, I don't think as much, simply because Illinois was never in play for the Republican Party this cycle.
Certainly not at the presidential level.
No.
My question more is down ballot. Does it have an impact?
I was getting to that, Colin. You should let me finish
Sorry,
my
my
sentence.
bad. My bad.
What you're going to see is that if RFK actually has any coattails, what you're going to end up seeing is a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise vote are going to be showing up to vote for RFK because, they don't like Biden, they don't like Trump, so, more independent-minded folks are going to show up to vote. I don't know. I would assume that those people would have more of an anti-incumbent type voting down ballot, where they, instead of just vote, they're going to vote for RFK and they're going to vote for whoever's not the incumbent. There are people who automatically will do that, more independent-minded folks. The RFK voter is very broad, so you cannot tie them down to either being more conservative or liberal. Some RFK voters are very conservative, and they view him as actually more of a pure candidate than Trump sometimes, which is weird, but, especially on the vaccine stuff, they might believe that. And then there's some Democrats who are just voting for RFK because they think Biden's lost it, and, they don't want to vote for him anymore. So I think right now I'd say it's it's kind of a wash in Illinois, though there is perhaps an advantage for Republicans if enough RFK voters simply vote anti-incumbent, because Lord knows there's not a lot of Republican incumbents in this state. So if they just vote anti-incumbent, it's going to be benefits for Republicans.
You made a good point, one that I think I want to kind of dig into with our data people, which is for a lot of our campaigns, our big concern has been turnout. I believe, and I think some of our other people on our team believe, that this is going to be one of the lowest turnout elections we've seen in a long time, because at the top of the ticket, no one's excited, at least very few people are excited by either of the candidates. And so if someone like an RFK being on the ballot helps keep some of those people from staying home, it might have an impact on turnout. So that's something I hadn't thought of. The other thing I like is that the third party candidate is an independent. Well, something that people don't realize is that in the state of Illinois, if a third party gets 5% or higher of the vote, the rules are different for them in the next election. They are now an established party, and so them getting, they have to get fewer signatures to get on the ballot in the next election. There's a few other benefits to someone from that party, and so if you didn't have an independent candidate who would get that 9%, it might have been the Libertarian candidate or the Constitutional Party candidate. And when you have Libertarian candidates or Constitution Party candidates in districts where you also have Republicans, they're going to be polling votes from Republicans. So the one thing I like is that if people are going to look for someone alternatively to vote for other than Trump or Biden, they're not going to throw it towards the, Sam McCann Conservative Party or the Constitution Party or the Libertarian Party, which could hurt us in 26, 28 and down the road. So that alone to me seems like a small benefit for Republicans. But beyond that, I think it's really just when it comes to turnout. I think you made a good point.
I think in Illinois, the Trump-Biden race hurts us, and so anything that happens that muddies that water and makes it a three-person race, makes it less of a referendum on Trump, is helpful to Republicans.
Fair.
So I would take that as well.
That's a fair point.
So as I've been digging through data on who RFK's supporters are, and this is a national picture, there are two buckets. There's he's an environmental lawyer, he's going to save us from climate change, super far left voter that hurts Biden. Then there's the anti-vax crowd that would have probably previously been MAGA. Are they going to go to Kennedy over Trump? Maybe. So you're probably picking from both sides on the top of the ticket, which again, I don't think matters in a state where Biden won by more than 1 million votes in 2020. I don't know. I would say the only congressional race that it could impact is the 17th. Sorensen has tried to position himself as the pro-climate change or pro-climate change agenda fix whatever guy. And McGraw has positioned himself as I don't know what at this point other than I'm a judge, who has had no real agenda other than shut the border down. I don't know how either of those guys is impacted by that. And that might be the closest of any race we see, especially on the congressional level. When you get down to a state house race, I have to assume that the buckets are so low and the voters are so tuned out and so low information that I can't imagine that RFK voters are deciding state house races. It's hard to imagine.
The only race that also had I'd say notable, I guess, at least enough to talk about, though I know Pfingsten's going to jump to that mic pretty quickly when I say what I'm about to say, is IL-13. And I had this on the docket to talk about weeks ago because there's a Green Party candidate who announced with Jill Stein, who is the presidential candidate. She came into town to announce with this Green Party candidate, whose names I would botch if I tried to say this name. But Chibu is the nickname. Chibu is the nickname for this candidate. I know you don't believe 13 is in play, and based on the numbers, I know 13 is not one of the top 3 or 4 congressional districts that Republicans are looking at the state. But there is an active Green Party candidate in that district in IL-13, which a Green Party candidate is not going to take from Republicans. So maybe that slightly helps Joshua Lloyd. I know you're probably going to grab the mic and say it doesn't matter, that district's way out of play. But there was, of all the other candidates who filed, other than Kennedy, it's the only other one that was notable that I saw on the list.
You know, I've got a lot of Champaign-Urbana background, and Green Party candidates have been running in that neck of the woods for years, and they've never made a difference. They will pull a couple of thousand votes away from Nikki Budzinski in Urbana, probably specifically. It's not going to change that race, even if it were a tier 1 race. I mean, Joshua Lloyd is unfunded, unsupported, off the radar, completely out of sight, out of mind from DC.
So if Lloyd could actually make it close, it could be a factor, but at this point, not a factor.
He's not a factor.
Right.
I would ask what Nikki Budzinski's position on Israel-Palestine is. And the reason why I would ask that question is I would agree with Patrick. That district's not in play this cycle, and Nikki Budzinski's going to win. But because Israel-Palestine's in the news, and you have a lot of college, you have Urbana-Champaign, major college community in that, in that district. If the Green Party candidate was running simply to cause a stink over Israel-Palestine and, create a division on the Democratic Party's left, I think it could be a factor if there was a better funded candidate. We actually had things going on, but that would be contingent on all the other things, which I agree
No,
with
and that's
you on,
certainly a
Patrick.
fair point, and I do think she voted for the Israeli package a couple of weeks ago. I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure she did. But in those circles, you haven't seen kind of your Democratic socialist super lefty crowd crowing about her. They're more mad that the Urbana Police Department wants to have cops. So I don't know that it's really on the radar down there.
Let's move on to more hypocrisy in government, because we're in Illinois. That's kind of just a permanent topic. But the pro-union left, led by Speaker Welch, all pro-union Democrats, have been spending, 2 years at this point trying to quench the efforts from the legislative staffers they're unionizing, and it's hit a fever pitch where those legislative staffers have now filed a lawsuit. Now Speaker Welch is trying to get that lawsuit tossed out. I know you wrote a column on this, so I'll pass it to you first on this topic, but I love to talk about hypocrisy on the left. It's one of my favorite topics, and this one is just ripe for it because as Republicans have tried, at least some of us have tried to make inroads with unions and union households, you've got a pretty stark example here of how Democrats will use them maybe for their votes, but don't actually, in some cases, have their best interests at heart. And here Welch has spent 2 years trying to stop them from unionizing, and they've given up and they've taken it to the courts.
A little more than a year, actually, that the legislative staffers, House Democratic staffers, said they wanted to form a union under the Workers' Rights Amendment. They wanted the Speaker to recognize it. He didn't, of course. They passed a bill during veto session last year that would allow legislative staff to unionize, but anyone who wasn't one of those kids in the legislative staff union meetings, apparently they didn't realize that the Senate was just going to kill it, and it has been dead
Which is a
since
tried
then.
and true tactic down in Springfield.
Totally,
We even talked about it on one of our podcasts, I think with you. We said
Everybody
one house
knew.
will pass it, the other house will kill it.
Everybody knew Don Harmon was going to kill it, and he did, and he has. They started raising a stink in May, of course, which when everyone's paying attention to the legislature, they even there were rumors that they were going to not show up to work near the end of session one day. They ended up filing a lawsuit at the end of May, early June, asking for the courts to recognize the union. The Speaker's lawyers, Mike Casper and Mike Delgado, for anyone who knows Democratic lawyers, they're two of the power hitters. They put a scathing, almost two-faced motion to dismiss out earlier this week, and you have to imagine that this is like a brewing civil war inside Democratic circles in the State House, because not only is the Speaker trying to stop an insurrection, which is a bad word to use in today's politics, but a mutiny of his own staff, where they could certainly all leave for better jobs. and there are some pretty smart cookies on that staff. He's also got to try and get $2 or $3 or $4 million from unions to win elections in November, and if he's upsetting union bosses, that's not a good play for him either. It's not like they're not gonna. It's not like they're gonna go. Not like AFSCME's going to give money to Republicans, but if they stay home, that could make a difference. It's a really weird look for the Speaker of the House, who was the pro-union worker champion of the Workers' Rights Amendment, to now be a union buster.
Well, I know you're going to want to jump in, and you're our union guy. I just want to make this point. Where are Republicans on this? I know they say if your opponent's house is on fire, don't piss on them to put the fire out, and I get that concept. But politically, I feel like there's a lot to gain for Republicans here. You made an awesome point, which I get, but I think the party in general, you made a point a while ago, Republicans should just step up in this and say, fine, we'll let our people unionize and just make the Democrats look awful on this. Why aren't we pulling the union household list in every targeted Republican district and plastering it with, look at what Welch and the Democrats are doing here to squelch unions. This is the party you're supporting, and they hate unions. I mean, we could have stuff in front of union households in every tier 1 Republican target district. There is room here. We should be putting spotlights on every time something happens here, pointing out the hypocrisy when it comes to Democrats and unions. I feel like there's a lot of space here, maybe not in Springfield, because I know our legislators aren't necessarily voting for things like this, but politically, back home, there's a lot of space here to spend the summer going to union households and pointing this out.
No, I 100% agree, and that's what I've been advocating for this whole time. I don't know if the House Republican, leadership would let that happen, because there's still some people who aren't very favorable to union rights in the state of Illinois General Assembly. That's fine. I get it. They have to represent their constituencies and everything. My point was going to be in the larger scale is that ever since Welch became Speaker, the unions have tried their best to have the best relationship with him as possible because he's the Speaker of the House and they want to have a good relationship with him. When Welch's wife ran for judge, they bankrolled his wife's campaign, got her elected judge. Every time Chris Welch has told the unions jump, they have asked how high. Every time the organized labor has asked Chris Welch for something, most of the time they don't get it. Most of the time they've been getting screwed time and time again down in Springfield, and yet they keep coming back. Chris Welch keeps coming back to them, asking them for more. They give it to him, and then he turns around and screws them again. I think somebody at these unions, at least the trade unions, the more conservative ones who have something to lose in this state in the future, need to step up and say, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. We need to actually see something returned from the Democratic Party in the state again. And if the Democratic Party keeps screwing them, the Republican Party needs to grow up, stop this obsession that some people have, especially downstate, that unions are bad for some reason, and start coming to the table, at the very least working with these interests. Because if you just show an ability to work with them, you're doing better than Chris Welch is right now. So that's what I think needs to happen, and I wish people would grow up in this. Thank you.
And I think it's really good what you say, Collin. Like, they're in a box. And going back to the Madigan thing of Madigan consolidating so much power, like now the Democrat Party has a problem of trying to keep everyone in their party. And so the more we can do to drive that wedge and go to the union households and say, this is what they're doing, this is what they support, like there's a listening ear for you. And I think the unions have been good about hedging their bets. And so just making that overture is important. I think you get support.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot. Union households are not as far left as union leadership, typically. I mean, my brother-in-law is down in Missouri, and he's like the most conservative guy you've ever met. And he's worked at a union. He'd be considered a union household. I mean, they're not as left-leaning as leadership tends to be in some of these unions. Going straight to the union members and just pointing this out, making this clear. It's ridiculous. We talked about it last week, and I really was sad Chris wasn't with us, but poor guy had to get a vacation at some point. We talked about AFL-CIO and how they only endorsed 3 Republicans compared to well over 100 Democrats, including you had a Republican who had a great voting record with them, who we had on last week in the top Republican whole district, but they went with LaToya Greenwood because that's what Democratic bosses told them to do instead of going with Schmidt, who actually is pro-union.
Greenwood had a 100% voting record with.
But you have a chance to have a Republican actually speaking to your issues in Springfield.
But if you're AFL-CIO, do you want LaToya Greenwood, who's with you 100% of the time, or do you want Kevin Schmidt, who's with you 50% of the time? I mean, for them, it's an easy decision.
I don't know that it's that easy.
I would argue that you're seeing progress from AFL-CIO to go with 3 Republicans, because I think it's been 0 in recent years.
Yeah,
and
you're
seeing
right,
more.
yeah.
You're seeing more IEA. You're obviously seeing Local 150 come in for more Republicans these days, even though they're not as super progressive as maybe some of the others. You know, I think AFL-CIO is trying to make some inroads, and they're not stupid. I mean, I know Tim Duray, I know Pat Devaney. They're good guys. They're smart guys, but sometimes you've also got to go with the horse you brought, right? And you know, you got to put your resources behind the people who are going to help you move your agenda. And if you're asking AFL-CIO, is LaToya Greenwood better for us than Kevin Schmidt? Absolutely. The answer for them is yes.
And a scorecard, yes, maybe. But we talked about this last week. You have a Democrat speaking your talking points that gets ignored because every Democrat is speaking your talking points. You get a Republican down in Springfield who is actually favorable to your agenda. That has more of an impact.
You got to get to 60. That's the answer. You got to get to 60. And if you're the AFL-CIO, who helps you get to 60?
If you can get more Republican votes, that's still votes.
But when you're pushing 80 Democrats in the House already, and you may very well be over 80 in the House after November, you need all the friends you can get, because we saw in May that the Democrats were perilously close to blowing their own agenda. So you need all the friends you can get on the side that's in power. So I certainly understand where they're coming from, especially in that check mark of who's going to be with us. Do they need more Republican friends? Absolutely. But if you have a binary choice between 100% and 50%, you're taking 100%.
So where's the incentive then for Republicans to ever vote with those unions? If the Republicans are with them 90%, but the Democrats can be with them 100%, why does that Republican even take a politically risky vote down in Springfield that could anger some of their base if the union's just going to endorse against them anyhow?
But I think you've seen that. I mean, they endorsed Jennifer Santilitro, who is less
in a race that she was never going to. That doesn't matter because she was going to win no matter what.
I think she's clearly the favorite to win that district. I wouldn't say she's going to win it no matter what.
Coffey's going to win no matter what. Santilitro is going to win no matter what. Stevens is going to win. In the one
Stevens
race,
is unopposed.
Well, there you go. So in the race where it mattered, in the race where you've got Democrat versus Republican, where it's the top race, tier 1 race, they went with the Democrat. And my point is simply that there's no incentive for Republicans to vote with them. If they know, this is like personal PAC. If you're not with them 100%, then why even be with them at all? Because they're just going to be against you. That's the bucket that unions are putting themselves in right now with this.
But Colin, this is also just the state AFL-CIO. This has nothing to do with local unions, which could very well buck the state AFL-CIO and endorse Kevin Schmidt anyway. Like that's like, don't constrain like just the state AFL-CIO endorsed LaToya Greenwood. You know what? Who the hell cares? What actually matters...
Her checkbook cares.
Yeah, she's going to get a lot of money as a result of that.
Well, yeah, but you could do the same thing with Kevin Schmidt pulling off all the local unions, and he can get it. But the point... I'm trying to agree with you, Patrick. You're shaking your head at me. But no, seriously, there's still an incentive for Republicans to support organized labor issues. Number one, because the fact of the matter is, not a lot of people in this state are anti-union unless you live in like Kenilworth or something. So it's not going to actually matter. Like no voter at the door is going to care if you're like, oh, I want to bust the unions. We saw with Rauner, didn't work. Voters didn't like that, and voters already approved the collective bargaining amendment to this state. So there's still an incentive for Republicans to work well with local unions, get their support, get the support of local union members. And yeah, you're right. The checkbook matters from the state AFL-CIO, but so do local union checkbooks, and some of them have a lot of money. So I believe you should still have a pro-union voting record. Work with your local unions, and if the state AFL-CIO wants to be dicks about it, let them be dicks about it. Prove them wrong, beat them.
Let's talk about another issue. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just from my respectful individual experience, like the union, we always talk about. It seems like the conversation about we talk about unions as a monolith. But I think your point is very well taken, which is if you look at Local 150 and their membership in a place like McHenry County, they probably track more Republican than they do Democrat. And so to me, when you're talking about unions, the personality of the union that could be divided and maybe brought towards the right depends on its membership, and it ultimately depends on the mission. I don't think whoever the union is that represents DCFS, my guess is they could probably never be brought over to the right. But when you're looking at membership of something like a Local 50 or the people that build and fix things and all the rest of it, those people are pro-Trump, those people are pro-crime, those people are pro-police all day long.
Yeah, and that's what we're saying. Go to the households. Those union
Yeah.
members are absolutely winnable.
Yeah,
Close
I
us
would
out
say
on
like
this.
there's no downside on the Welch thing specifically to go to targeted to union households and put him on defensive and say this is what Welch has done that is not in your interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Two issues have brought cost of living back to light, as it always should be every week, so let's talk about them just in the last week. So it was released that property taxes in southern Cook County have hit the roof. Maria Pappas, the Cook County treasurer, put out a report that showed that property taxes have jumped by an average of about 20% in the region. In some places it nearly doubled in southern Cook. And so property taxes are back in the headlines, as they should be, since we have the second highest property taxes in the whole country. And on July 1st, of course, it doesn't get noticed much because it's just baked in, but on July 1st, gas taxes will be going up yet again because they've been indexed to go up every year. And so on July 1st, as you go get your gas, the gas taxes will have gone up yet again. So two things yet again, where working families who are struggling are seeing yet again those costs are being raised as a result of those taxes. So we got to talk about it. I know people like their roads. I know there's a reason why the gas tax has been indexed, and I get that. But from a political standpoint, you have Democrats in charge of this state, and under their watch, cost of living continues to go up and up and up. And in southern Cook County, they're about to get just waylaid.
You know, it's another Fritz Kagi masterclass going on in Cook County right now. Every year, Fritz came into this office with this idea of we're going to limit the burden on homeowners and taxpayers and, in residential, and we're going to raise the burden on businesses. Well, all that's happened is that he's doubled the burden on both of them. He's made neither of them happy with his policies. It was interesting. I was reading an article about this topic, and people who live in Park Forest. Park Forest is a community right on the Cook County, Will County border. And the difference between property taxes in the Cook County side of Park Forest and the Will County side of Park Forest, it can be up to like $3,000, $4,000 a year in property taxes. And that area of Cook County, like that, they call it the Southland, that area is the most property tax burden place in the country. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe Country Club Hills has the highest property tax burden in the entire United States of America. That's how bad it is in southern Cook County right now. And these are minority communities, majority African-American communities that are continuously being hurt by the property tax policies in Cook County. And we've talked before how most voters, is taxes an issue? Is it, yes, no? I'll tell you, in that part of Cook County, property taxes are an issue. And somebody needs to step up in 2026, take out Kagi, because he's probably the one, other than Kim Fox, who's, thank God, retiring right now, he's the other most vulnerable incumbent Democrat in Cook County right now. Somebody needs to take out Kagi because it's not getting better anytime soon.
Property taxes are a really hard situation to fix, especially from the state level. Either the state's dumping billions more into schools to cut their property taxes, or you've got to find a new local funding mechanism to do that, because you can't just tell a school district, cut your property taxes, and that's 50% of your tax.
But here's just the other side of this, because you're making a valid point, but the other side of this is Springfield can stop making it worse. I think the challenge, because look at it right now. So Springfield has mandated that every school district must provide full-day kindergarten by 2027, but they provided no funding to do it. So you have a bunch of these schools that now have to raise instructional costs, which is their operating rate levy. They have to find money for infrastructure to build because they don't have space to put these kids. And Springfield has said, you have to get this done, and we're not going to give you any cash to do it. So where are they going to get the money? Property taxes.
Yeah, and try to make the operating system for a public school district that's imposed upon counties and local school districts is such a poor operating system, and it's a near impossibility. It doesn't matter whether the school board there's almost nothing that you can do on a local level to bring property taxes down by virtue of the fact of all of the mandates and all of the rest of the strictures that you basically inherit from the state.
Yeah, I mean, the costs for some, we're dealing with it now. We're looking at some of these districts and the cost to put in full-day kindergarten. I get it. It's well-meaning. I understand why Mary Beth Canty pushed this. She's my state rep. It sounds great on paper. Sounds great in Springfield. But if we're going to do something about property taxes, it's these mandates, big to small. You talk to any of these superintendents, like, my hands are tied. You look at the majority of my budget is stuff I have to do because Springfield and politicians have said I have to do it. I have no space to try to reduce that budget.
I also think it's mismanaged priorities. I mean, the governor and the grocery tax this year, is likely going to turn into a property tax increase to a lot of communities, because you're going to see cities who are now hosed because they're losing millions and millions of dollars in funding, they're either going to have to put in their own grocery tax, which will unfairly impact low-income people, which is a fair point, or they're going to have to increase property taxes so they spread out the burden everywhere.
Well, there was a letter put out by the Mount Vernon mayor. I want to further your point.
One thing on the property or on the grocery tax.
I just want to add for clarification. So Mount Vernon's mayor, John Lewis, put out something just a couple weeks ago that I haven't had a chance to talk about. Mount Vernon's going to lose 1.2 million. Springfield's going to lose 3.8 million. Rockford, 8 million. Chicago, 80 million. So your point about municipalities losing these revenues, just giving some context to that.
It doesn't help people either. I pulled our last 3, I think, grocery bills. So probably about $400 in groceries. We're 2 people and a kid, so it's not like we're paying huge grocery bills, but it's still there. It still counts between inflation and cost of living, that sort of thing. You know how much we paid in the grocery tax and those $400 in groceries? 10 cents. 1 cent grocery tax, 10 cents. It's not going to help people. It's just going to hurt cities.
Yeah, and as you said, you look at, let's say Springfield, 3.8 million, they got to find that money somewhere. Rockford, 8 million, that's a big hole in the budget. They got to find that money somewhere. That's yet another situation where Springfield has hurt this problem. It's the Democrats in control of Springfield who have put yet another situation on local municipalities where now they're going to raise property taxes. And yet, those same Springfield politicians are going to go on TV for the next 3 months and say, we have lowered your taxes. We've lowered, they're going to put out, I voted for X and Y and Z bills that are going to help your property taxes. And yet,
I got state-funded frank mail from my state representative the other day that essentially said, Marty Moylan's cutting your taxes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the dichotomy here of, maybe they can't do something about lowering it, but they certainly could stop creating situations where they're going to keep going up. And that's that cost of living when we talk about working families who are struggling, whether it's $1, $100, or $1,000. These working families are struggling, and these property taxes are a big part of that, especially in regions like Southern Cook. All right, probably the last major topic we have time for, but we've got to absolutely talk about this. Chris and I have been digging into this all day here to bring this up, and I think it plays into our first conversation about how we label things. So, not sure if you guys have seen this prior to, it's just come up the last couple of days, but in the city of Chicago, parents are no longer going to be notified of their children's misbehavior. There's a movement here with the Board of Education. This is happening on Thursday. We're recording on Thursday, so it's happening now. I don't have the final details, but essentially, and I'll let you, Chris, give us more details on this, but essentially, unless you are caught bringing a gun to school, you are not going to be labeled as somebody who has misconduct or violations, because they said that those are stigmatizing words. We don't want to use those with young people, with young students. And so they're basically doing away with labeling anything as bad behavior because it could stigmatize these kids. And they're not going to let parents know that the kids even did this, so parents could do something about it. What did I miss? I know that was a poor introduction here.
So it's not only going to be bringing a gun to school. There will be other things that
But something to that level.
Right, yeah. It's like they're not going to formally discipline any children unless it is something so egregious as you are bringing a gun to school, or something along the lines of you are affecting the well-being of your fellow students and staff and something like that. It should be noted that the policy in which they are implementing this isn't for like older children. This is for preschoolers to second graders, which is weird. If the preschooler is bringing a gun to school, there are so many more red flags going on in that situation than just like how we're disciplining them. But irregardless, the point being is that they are trying to limit the discipline of children right before they are reaching the age of reason, when they are very receptible to discipline. You're supposed to, and I'm the only person who's not a father here that I know of course, but I'm the only person who's not a father here right now. But my understanding of small children is that when they are at that, kindergarten to second grade age is when they're finally starting to understand things like discipline. They're reaching the age of reason. And now we're not even going to say that they're disciplining children. And in many communities where children are not being disciplined at all, and they're growing up into these lives of crime and degeneracy that's plaguing many communities in Chicago right now, they need as much discipline as they can get in their early developmental stages. And the Chicago Board of Education is moving away from that because they don't want to stigmatize children. They don't want to traumatize children either. And it's just going to have negative repercussions. I think that these are These small developing children, they need to be disciplined in some regard, and it shouldn't just be their discipline because they brought a gun to school. That can't be the only reason why we discipline children, people.
And I think I look at this as part of it. I want to pass it to you, Pat, as part of this movement here where we can't use words like criminal anymore. We can't use words like misconduct or violations because we're going to hurt people's feelings or stigmatize them. And I think this is part of a broader, larger movement that I think you on the front lines are seeing the results of that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking, like, when it comes to what you try, there's so much a deep philosophical agreement when it comes to how we're approaching these two things. The problem with the whole purpose of punishment and inflicting some type of response is to treat the person as a moral agent and not merely as a victim of your circumstances, or not merely as a victim of your environment or the hardship that you suffer. And so if you're going to say that if you're going to take, let's say, a rule which is underlined by a moral precept, don't bring a gun to school, don't punch another person, and you're going to dilute or diminish the response to that and that person's accountability, and rather you're going to take some sort of like conditioning role where you engage in, let's say, cognitive behavioral therapy in an effort to that's treating a human being the same way that you would treat a ox that you're getting something pulled in a field by hitting them with a whip. What you're saying when there is no response to your action, the fundamental message that you're communicating is that your actions are not important. The more we recognize consequences of somebody's actions and the more we actually respond to those with a sense of accountability, the more we're treating that person like a human being, the more we're recognizing that they have an onus, a responsibility, and a will to abstain from that type of behavior. And a parent's role in that is foundational to instilling that exact same point. And so taking the parent out of that is an existential threat.
And the basis for this is grounded in very philosophical roots, is that it's based on a determinism, that we don't have free will, that children, aren't responsible, not even children, none of us are responsible for our actions, and that disciplining somebody is really only as a you're supposed to make sure people don't do it, but we're moving in a direction of where discipline itself is bad because people, like children and people themselves, cannot be held responsible for their own actions. And that's where a lot of this, and this is like the higher end of all of this, but that's where all of this stuff come from, where we're treating people like oxen. Like Pat said, that's what we're doing. We're treating people like oxen where we don't have free will anymore. And it's going to make the situations that we find in inner cities that are struggling with lack of parenting in the home and all of these sorts of things, and these children are not getting disciplined at school, they're not getting disciplined at home, and it's only going to exacerbate the problems that we're seeing in a lot of these low-income communities.
Well, I think Pat hit on a big thing. I mean, you saw parents' rights be a big deal for a small portion of time where it was politically, it helped Youngkin and in his election, and you saw it try to play a little bit in Illinois, though we did it very badly. But I think you see this a lot amongst a lot of parents. And our data, our polling that we revealed last month was that Republicans are doing a really bad job with parents. It's not a subgroup. We're actually winning, even though we should be. This is yet another situation of parents' rights being eroded. When my kid goes to school, if he does something wrong, I want to know about it. Like, let me decide whether that rose to a level where that child should be disciplined or not disciplined. Fine, I'm cool with that, but at least let me know about it. But a part of this is if you're not even going to label it, you're not even going to point to it, then the parents won't even be aware of it. And I want to know if my kid misbehaved in school, but we're no longer even going to let parents give them that information. There's this underpinning here of not trusting parents to parent their own children.
Yeah, to me, like, it seems to me, and this is a Chicago public school thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so it just seems to me like if a meteor was coming towards Earth, okay, and I was on Patrick's radio show. You and me had a radio show, and it's like meteors coming towards Earth. Turn up get as big of a, and just get honest with people about, like, the whole thing is collapsing in around you. To me, this is the death throes of the Chicago public school. I mean, they have been getting crazier and crazier and crazier over the last 5, 10, 15 years in terms of what they're saying, what they're actually acknowledging that they really think. And to me, it is fundamentally a virtue of the fact that they are dying. There's less and less kids in schools. Less and less influence, and this is just sort of they're finally getting honest.
You want to do a show after you leave office?
I'd love to.
Let's be real. If a meteor was hurtling towards Earth, you just call Bruce Willis and he'll take care of the problem. And that's what Michael Bay taught us.
All I'll say is I hope an elected Chicago school board brings outside individuals that have real responsibility to their neighborhoods and their families, and decentralizes the power away from CTU, because that's not working.
I mean, is this something, again, I always have to put the political spin because our audience is political people. Is this something that's useful for us in campaigns? Do we go to parents and point to this bad behavior? I feel like continuing to show parents that their rights are being eroded by the left is something that benefits the right. Am I crazy in that?
I think it certainly has some, juice in a race for Chicago elected school board. I looked at the list of candidates for Chicago's elected school board that was released this week, and I was very underwhelmed by the list of candidates, frankly. But even still, I think there's something to be said here that there is that CTU's going crazy. The Chicago Board of Education's been crazy for a long time. We have a crazy person as mayor of Chicago, has no idea what they're doing. I think this continues to add to the messaging of Chicago public schools are continuing to fail children. That same type of mentality is coming to a school district near you, because these same type of philosophical overtones that I talked about earlier, they're going to trickle down to every school district around this country. That's coming to you, and I think there is a messaging potential in it.
Listen, I like to run guerrilla-style politics. When you're completely out of power, as Patrick has pointed out, we are the super minority of the super minority in this state at this point. Your only hope is guerrilla tactics. And so something like this happens, I want to put it in front of every parent in my district to be like, hey, listen, this is what the far left is doing for you. Maybe be open to our messaging. I mean, this is the kind of thing we got to be putting in front of the voters, because they're not aware. They don't know. We talk about it. The average person in the streets has no idea this stuff is happening. If we don't take the message to the voters, then all we're doing is ranting and raving for 10 minutes on a podcast and then moving on with our lives.
And we have nothing to lose at this point. If you're on the right in this state, you have nothing to lose by using this type of messaging. I don't see how it hurts you. Go for it. Try it. See what happens.
We also have a lot of candidates who are credible messengers on it, because you have young parents, and that's something different that we haven't had in the past. So I think that's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, you're right. All right, we've gotten to half of our agenda. So I know you guys have the agenda. In your closing remarks, if you'd like to get to one of the topics we didn't cover, certainly feel free. We've got some new segments that our producer's been trying to get me to bring up, and in the last few weeks I've failed, and he's yelled at me, rightfully so. We're supposed to be naming an OG of the week, who's like the original gangster, right? Is that OG? Who's the winner of the week? The clown of the week? Anybody have any thoughts on who we should be nominating or calling for those two titles from the week?
I'd say for the clown of the week, Brandon Johnson every week unless there's someone better.
So he's like the default?
Default clown of the week.
Okay.
My clown is Mary Miller, who continues to fail the voters of her district by refusing to secure federal funds that are available to her and are choking off small, dying rural communities that need help. And she sucks at her job and needs to be defeated in the next primary.
There's certainly something to be said for if there's federal dollars available for your district and you're not bringing them home because you want to stand on principle. Who's getting hurt by that is a valid question.
I got an OG if you want it.
Yeah?
Adam Kinzinger. I am so damn proud of him for standing for his beliefs. I've known him for a long time. I consider him a friend. I don't necessarily agree that just because he doesn't like Donald Trump that Joe Biden is automatically the choice. I think there are a lot of people like me who think both suck. But I am very proud of him. He is a lifelong conservative. His voting record was conservative. He has been betrayed by his own party just because he stood up against the bad orange man.
The only principles that Adam Kinzinger is standing up for this endorsement is the candidate who can drop the most bombs on the Middle East in any given presidential term, because that's the only thing Adam Kinzinger cares about. And Joe Biden fits that bill for him.
So I take it you would disagree with Kinzinger being the OG of the week?
I would label Kinzinger the clown of the week, in fact. Thank you.
Anyone else have thoughts? I mean, I'd say since we finally have him on, I'd give Kenneally a nomination for OG for the successful trial for DCFS. I feel like that's a good nomination as well.
Yeah, you guys, I mean, I'm surprised none of you nominated me.
All right, well, at least we're talking about it. I know Lane wants me to officially call. I would say DCFS probably wins Clown of the Week just for our discussion as a group, because even though Johnson should be the default, I don't know we have anything specific about him this week to call him, but I'd certainly give that to DCFS. OG of the Week, we'll give it to Kenneally. Give it to our boy here. All right, closing thoughts as we've got people coming in. We're going to start smoking some cigars and having some fun talking politics. Closing thoughts. Let's start with you, Chris, since you got the mic.
It's debate night in United States of America, the first presidential debate. If you think I look like Ken Bone, you are absolutely correct. Especially, I don't have the mustache going right now, but when I do, you would be right to assume that. The debate doesn't matter. Nobody's mind will be changed by the debate tonight. You should tune in for some yucks. I'm sure Trump will drop some few one-liners. I'm hoping Biden comes out with a few come on mans. That's my favorite Joe Bidenism. So hoping for a good show tonight. Do not think it has anything to do with policy. It doesn't. Nobody actually cares, but let's just get some yucks tonight and enjoy the debate.
Two old men yell at clouds while on national TV. That's basically what the debate is.
What I'll say is that the debate itself doesn't matter because Democrats are screwing the pooch. They are far more focused on felon Donald Trump and all of the stuff that people already know very well. They should be caring only and solely about how do you reach that small percentage of voters in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania who were, Trump 2016, Biden 2020, and are on the fence in 2024. They are blowing this election right in front of our eyes.
Why don't you got the mic, give us your closing thoughts, unless that was it. All right, well done. Mark?
Closing thoughts for me is I think we talked about a number of issues that are boiling beneath the surface, and so the challenge and opportunity, whether it's DCFS or Welch Union or parents' rights, is collating all those things, putting it into a coherent message, and combining that with the cost of living and property taxes. And if we can do that, we should be successful in November.
Pat?
Closing thoughts are, I just want to thank you for having me on the podcast. This was a delight. As somebody who plans to stay in Illinois and fight, I got a lot to learn, and it's meeting people like you guys that, and hearing all of your vast knowledge that I think is going to help me and other people do that.
All I have is this as we close it down is thank you guys for being on. Thank you for joining us. People got to get involved. I love that we've got the viewers that we have, but nothing's going to change if we don't get involved and make it change. We talk about DCFS. It's clearly not going to happen from the top down. We got to make a difference. We got to elect people who are actually going to go down to Springfield and make it, force it to become the top issue. Talk about cost of living. We talk about some of these big issues like you brought up. It's really going to come down to, do we elect people to Springfield? Do we elect people to local office who are actually going to make a difference on these things? We actually got some people here who came out to view, and one of them, I won't call him out by name, but fought for years up in Lake County. I will call you out by name. Dick Barr fought for years up in Lake County, but when you're the only voice, sometimes it can get lonely. We need people in office at the county level, at the state level, who are going to fight for what's right. And I think we've seen this, where you put one person in there, two people in there, three people in there, eventually they're going to tire out. It's too much for any single individual. But like Will County, if you can get a critical mass, if you can get a group of people together, you saw those leaders in Will County stand up, leave the room, and save taxpayers from politicians hiking their own pay. If you get enough people in office, they can make a difference, and we are just 4 months away from November. So put the phone down, go knock on some doors this weekend for your local Republican candidates, because if we don't make a change with who's in office, then all the rest of the stuff just isn't going to matter. With that, I'll say thank you to Lane Davis, our producer. Thank you to everybody who watches every week. We've got, next week's going to be 4th of July week, so we're trying to get some veterans on, talk about some veteran-focused issues, because we didn't get to do that on Memorial Day, so I think we got a pretty cool episode coming next week. So make sure you like and subscribe, because we will be back in your inbox next week in the Smoke-Filled Room.